if you're maintaining a high level of insurability, really more what you're doing is keeping your people safe. If insurance didn't exist, you would still have a duty to protect your organization and your people. Act like the insurance doesn't even exist and do the things that you would do that you're responsible for. Having this, safety net out there, you'll maintain a high degree of insurability and you'll have safe people as well.
What keeps you up at night? For many ministry leaders, unfortunately, that's, do we have enough insurance? Can we keep our insurance? Can we pay for our insurance? How do we make it cheaper? All of those things that are administrative headaches that aren't even the thing that you're called to do. Now, John Korsmo, my friend and the president of Lightwell in the state of Colorado, Nebraska, Kansas, both Dakotas, and Wyoming, is here to talk to us today about insurability for ministries, how to improve it, how to keep your eye on it, how to be proactive within it. It's a really helpful conversation. So get a pen and a paper and be ready to listen to our conversation today with John Korsmo. Well, it is my sincere pleasure to welcome in my friend John Korsmo to the Lightwell podcast for the first and hopefully not last time. John is the president of Lightwell in Colorado and also serves the states of Nebraska, Kansas, both Dakotas, and Wyoming in addition to Colorado. John, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you. It is our first time on a podcast, but it's not the first take on this podcast, is it, Adam?
No. If the viewers and listeners only knew how far into the recording we actually are at this point. But yes, it is a real pleasure to have you here. And you've been serving churches for how long, giving them insurance solutions at this point?
For about 17 years. It got my start just in regular property and casualty insurance, and shortly into my career realized focusing on ministries brought me a lot of purpose that maybe the rest of the industry might not have. I'm sure I could have had a fine career, but I feel like I've found my life's purpose in serving churches and related ministries and just love it.
That's fantastic. And so in that 17 years, you've probably seen the industry, the property casualty industry, but maybe even the church insurance industry change a lot. So what does insurability mean now that maybe has evolved even over the last 5 years?
Yeah. One word that doesn't get used enough, especially since COVID, are things like unprecedented, right? Have you ever heard anybody say that before?
Totally underused word for sure.
Yeah, it is. But it like what we're seeing right now, usually you would say, well, things are cyclical. And so over the last 17 to 20 years, we might have been through a few different cycles. But what we're seeing right now is completely different. And, from maybe some of the people who've been in the industry longer than me, they've also said the same thing. Insurability 5 years ago, basically everybody was insurable outside of just, ridiculously poor risks, like, risks that might have been in disrepair or really had poor management. But I almost look at now, like I kind of joke about it, insurance has almost become like a luxury item, something you can brag about, because it's so scarce to find insurance that matches with good terms and good pricing. It's not just a given anymore. We see what we would have seen 5 years ago as, very good risks that pass the eyeball test. Like if I'm driving, down the street and I look to my right and I see a beautiful church, I wouldn't need any more information other than that's what I want to work with. But now there's so much more to it. And that beautiful church may actually have to pursue coverage through the excess and surplus lines market because of things that have happened, just because of how the market's changed. And so it's just a completely different ballgame than what it used to be.
Yeah, that is very insightful. And I want to dig into the details of what you mean by that. So let's talk about the different types of organizations that you work with. And what are those insurability factors now? So you work with camps and schools in addition to traditional churches. So what are the things you're seeing now that matter when it comes to insurability? And you can answer that beginning or ending with any of those segments.
Yeah. So I would say, so primarily, number one, we work with, 80% of what we work with are churches. We do work with mission sending organizations, K through 12 schools, daycares, and camps. And then you just have other related ministries like, counseling centers and things like that. And I would say the number one driver still to insurability, that would have been the case 5 years ago too, but the teachers didn't grade on such a difficult scale 5 years ago The teachers are the underwriters. Underwriters grade pretty tough now. You got to be pretty dialed in, and so claims history is still going to be your primary driver. And we'll probably get to it a little bit later, but really it's not just claims history, but the types of claims that we see. And so the next piece would just be overall management of the property. We live in a world right now that being proactive has never been more important. You can't just wait for people to come and dictate to you what you need to do. It's actually going to mean a lot more if something happens and you say, you know what, this thing happened and we're going to make changes right away rather than waiting for a letter from the company or something like that saying, hey, you need to make these changes. And so I would say it is still claims history, but then your overall attitude and management towards your liability exposures and your property exposures, keeping a clean house, and then ultimately the financial management of things, all of that stuff really matters a lot, a lot.
So when it comes to that disposition of proactivity, that's something we've touched on here in the podcast before. And what I would love to know from you, John, is are there specific areas where you've seen churches wait to be told and that wasn't a good look for them versus they actually took the step without being asked and that was a win for them, for you as an agency or for their insurability with the company you're working with?
We just had a situation very recently where a church had, I think it was about, 3 claims in the last 5 years, which number one, that's not the end of the world. Big problem is all 3 of the claims were 6-figure claims. 2 of them were predictive in that there was a fire and then there was a pipe burst. And so the pipe burst and fire can be a real problem if they're coupled together. The hailstorm, you can't really do much about. But in regards to all 3 of those claims being packaged together, it was going to be a question of, can the insurance company stay on this risk long term? And so about the time that the insurance company likely would have been sending a non-renewal notice, which is nothing personal, right? We can even talk about what goes through and why insurance companies have to do things like this, but they do have to sometimes. The church approached us and said, hey, we know it's been a rough few years and we've installed automatic water shutoff valves and I think some sort of lightning suppression system, which both of those things essentially eliminated the possibility of the fire and
The
the
pipe
pipe
burst.
burst
Yeah.
happening again. And so that completely flipped the field on their insurability, and they did have to invest significant money to get that. But I can tell you, had they had to go to the E&S marketplace to get their coverage, that would have been a real issue for them. It would have been a lot more expensive.
Okay, so a lot of churches that you work with, I'm sure, have community outreach, community engagement as a thing that they do for ministry, and as they should. And you and all of our Lightwell partners work with a lot of ministries where uplifting their community is a core part of what that ministry is about. So how does that kind of thing, outreach, factor into a church's insurability?
I can tell you that a church being super outwardly focused and even doing things like, you know what, we're going to let kids play on our playground, even though, we don't really love it, but we're going to let them do it because we want to be involved in the community. I can tell you a regular general insurance company probably wants no part of even something like that. They certainly don't want any part of bounce houses in, the community park and food pantries. They all that stuff might exist outside the reality of what makes them feel comfortable. With a company like Brotherhood Mutual or even a competitor like Church Mutual, who's a fine company as well, they're going to look at things like that completely different because that's a really normal thing for a church to do. Okay. So number one, you don't have to feel bad about being involved in the community, but you still need to do it in a smart way. And and so if you're gonna do things like be involved in the community, all we want to know is that you're gonna be dialed in on your policies and procedures to just ensure that, whatever activity it is that you're doing is gonna be as safe as possible. So let's talk about, you know, maybe, and you might have some ideas on what community involvement might be, but one of the things that churches do a lot is they'll maybe rent out a community park space and do like a barbecue and they'll invite people and they'll have bounce houses. Okay. So here's what we would love versus what we know is realistic. we would love it if there was a person sitting outside every bounce house with a pen and waiver forms and making every person sign a waiver saying, if my child is hurt in here, which never ever go on YouTube and type in like bounce house accident,
Right.
especially if you work for the insurance company, because there's like a lot of bad things can happen. We would love it if everybody had to sign a waiver, but we also understand, because we do ministry, we understand ministry, that that's just not reasonable. One thing we would be very uncomfortable with, though, is if there was a claim where a bounce house just wasn't properly secured. We would definitely ask questions going forward. How is it that something like that happens? There's kids playing. It was 20-mile-an-hour winds. How did you not have those bounce houses secured? And I can promise you that something like that would be scrutinized a little bit more at the next renewal, and it might say a little bit more about the overall management practice of the church. And I don't know if you have any other like specific community involvement ideas, but
That's exactly like the idea that you're doing work outside of your church building on an occasional basis in the community is exactly what I'm talking about. That's a great example. And so that kind of feeds into the legal implications of what ministries do. And are there any kind of like common legal implications or pitfalls that ministries face that impact their insurability?
one of the questions that we get most is, would we be liable if, insert here, which, that's not necessarily like legal. It's civil liability and potential for civil negligence, where you might cause harm to somebody because you didn't, take care of your own business, where you might not be held responsible from like a criminal aspect, but there's definite liability exposure for things like that. And so I would say the biggest thing I would say is, I don't know if you would be held liable if whatever it was that happened. Anybody who's like, hey, where should I start in regards to my policies and procedures? I would absolutely start with an abuse prevention plan, something that's put together to make sure that your kids, the precious kids who attend and utilize the ministry, are going to be safe. If you look at some of the more high profile, cases, USA Gymnastics, Michigan State University, Penn State University, the Boy Scouts of America, in almost all those cases, there were situations where maybe people didn't feel quite right about what was going on, yet they didn't say something. And those are the cases that generally lead to like major negligence being handed out. Like it wasn't like, oh, something slipped through the cracks. It was like, no, there was institutional knowledge of people not feeling too good about what was going on, and yet they still didn't say anything. I would say there are major legal ramifications and civil ramifications that go along with knowledge of something that's going on, and then just maybe not doing the right things. From an insurability standpoint, you're almost uninsurable if things like that are happening, and that's the attitude toward things. And then there's other things like ADA compliance. There's things like the way that you employ your employees. A good example would just be an HR person really not understanding, wage and, hourly wage versus salary. And you just, you take liberties with things that you maybe shouldn't take liberties with. And then all of a sudden you find yourself in employment practices lawsuit because you weren't dialed in on what the actual policies and procedures needed to be. And so, those things can have a huge effect on your insurability. And again, in this marketplace that we're in, you want to be very dialed in.
That's really good. I mean, there's a lot there. And one thing that, I'd want to point out, just because I know how you would operate in this, is consulting with your insurance agent about these things proactively is huge. It's okay to have the questions, just knowing to ask them and having a resource in your corner and getting some dots connected before it's a reaction to something is a huge part of maintaining insurability and more importantly, keeping your people, your kids, your employees safe.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the whole thing, is that if you're maintaining a high level of insurability, really more what you're doing is keeping your people safe. If insurance didn't exist, you would still have a duty to protect your organization and your people. And so I always kind of tell people, like, act like the insurance doesn't even exist and do the things that you would do that you're responsible for. Having this, safety net out there doesn't necessarily take care of the news story that could come out. Like, we don't have an insurance policy that would make it so that the news couldn't come and interview people who were harmed by your ministry. That kind of stuff is going to happen if there's something that, bad that happens. And so protect it the way that you would whether or not the insurance exists. You'll maintain a high degree of insurability and you'll have safe people as well.
That's fantastic. And so people, staff is a normal thing. Every shoe store has staff, every library has staff. But volunteers is a unique thing about ministries. And so when it comes to training and protecting the people who are serving in and really executing your ministry, you're often talking about unpaid volunteers, and there can be many of them. So how do you consider training and equipping those people so that they aren't a risk to insurability for a ministry?
hmm And so one thing I would say too, when we talk about volunteers, again, talking about a generalist insurance company versus an insurance company that gets ministry, the way that our verbiage says in our form as to who's protected is any individual acting on behalf of the ministry within the scope of their delegated authority. And so you want to have a policy like that, because if you're an individual acting within the scope of your delegated authority on behalf of a ministry, but that's not named in the policy like that, if you do something that harms somebody else and you get sued for it, if you're with the wrong type of company, you may have no coverage. Say that you're a Sunday school teacher and a kid walks off the premises and gets lost, walks across the street, something like that, and a family sues for emotional harm, and they want to name, the Sunday school teacher in the lawsuit, which they absolutely would. You want to have a policy that's going to cover you, number one. Number two, as far as the need to train, the biggest thing that we talk about is have the training be extremely easy to digest. The bigger the manual isn't always the better. We want to make it so that it's very easy to follow and that it would actually stand up. Like, say you got sued, if there's 15 bullet points under each, duty to act, it can almost put you in a bad place, almost from the reverse standpoint of, was we asked them to be too prepared and they weren't able to do the basics, because there's no way anybody who's just a volunteer who works 4 hours a month would ever be able to act accordingly in the way that we ask them to. And so there absolutely should be training. It should probably be a few times a year where you're talking about things like, just scenario based. But it should also be, really, it should be pretty simple to enact the training that you get. If there was no training and something happened, imagine how easy it would be for a prosecuting attorney to say, okay, this bad situation happened. Tell us what you've done in the past to, reduce the risk of that. That's very easy to prove a high degree of negligence if there was no training at all.
Yeah. I mean, it goes back to what you said before. I absolutely love the idea that churches should operate in a way that they would if they didn't have insurance. Because without that safety net, you would be vigilant about making sure every volunteer did everything they possibly could, because you're in control of whether or not it goes well. And so I think it's a really good directive, not to make churches paranoid, but to say, are you taking all the steps that you absolutely have to take to make sure that you've covered the bases of, well, we did our best to communicate about that. We have a policy that says that. We made it easy to understand.
It does show too, like, if churches are acting as if they don't have insurance, they're taking a lot more ownership.
Yes.
And I can promise you, if you take ownership, I've seen enough crazy things. We insure 4,000 ministries. At any given time, we have 20 open sexual misconduct cases. Okay. And I mean, that's crazy when you actually think about it. And I think Brotherhood Mutual gets a few a week, new cases of those types. And I can promise you, it's some of the, again, eyeball test. When we drive by, these are the churches we want to work with. And they're amazing ministries who take a lot of ownership over their risk management program, yet they still have things happen. And so take ownership. That might reduce the risk, but it's not going to completely, which still illustrates the need for insurance. But if you take ownership, it is going to strongly reduce the risk of those types of things happening. And even more, if something bad happens, it'll be very hard to prove that there was some sort of lackadaisical
Right.
management attitude, which even more is gonna prove, maybe if you're in court, that there's a higher degree of negligence. It's not like either you were negligent or you weren't. There's
There's a
degrees of
there's a
negligence that can
continuum.
lead to overall how much at fault you were and how much could be potentially paid in the lawsuit, and really how much of the blame you need to carry personally for what potentially happened.
That's really great. And actually, so insurance does exist, thank goodness. Otherwise, you and I wouldn't be here. And that then speaks to when a claim does occur. Let's talk about that. What you talked about it up top, claim history and the factors that influence what a claim history actually looks like. You mentioned something, predictive claims. So can you talk us through what a claim history actually looks like when you're evaluating it as an insurance agent representing an insurance company? What are the things that move the needle the most?
Yeah. So 5, 7 years ago, I didn't even really think about what a predictive claim was. You had claims history, you had, loss ratios, and I think this does kind of matter. I think here's the thing. To an insurance company, what they want to look at is over the last 5 years, you've been able to maintain a loss ratio of probably less than 30%. If you can do that
Meaning
over the
what? Meaning
course.
what? In relationship to the premium
So,
that they're
like,
paying?
say over the course of 5 years, you paid 100,000 in premiums. An insurance company might say, "You know what? As long as they've had anywhere between 0 and $40,000 in claims, that's a reasonably, um, profitable, uh, client for us that we can maintain for a very long time. We know that there's gonna be some years they have losses, some years they don't, but it's never gonna." And then you have the other category of what we would call a shock loss. That would be a church that has pays $20,000 a year, has $1 million fire loss. And this is the piece that I want to give every church. Yes, that loss ratio is going to be out of whack for a really long time, but it's important to know that those types of losses happen. And that's why you have thousands of other churches within that pool to offset that. And so what we're really looking for are trends within a loss history that would say, you know what, this church is having the same kind of loss over and over again. Sometimes those trends can even be things that are totally out of your control. Like, you know what? This zip code has just had really bad luck with hailstorms, and they've had 3 in the last 5 years. We know there's nothing that you can do to protect that. And so in that case, about the only thing an insurance company can do is have an increase on deductible and make the church take on a much larger piece of it. And honestly, the church would say that that's not our fault, and the insurance company is in kind of the same spot. Like, I hate to say it, one of the things I'm going to talk about is, as an insurance partner, you have to use candor and tell people the truth. You can't just tell them everything that they want to hear. So it's neither person's fault. It's not the insurance company's fault or the client's fault, but sometimes you have to make hard decisions. Very rarely is it hail claims though. More often it's going to be pipes bursting, and slip and falls. It could be abuse, but you're not really seeing things like an abuse claim happening more than once. That doesn't happen very often. Pipes bursting though, the event in Texas, I think 3 years ago, was one of the most costly insurance events in history. It completely changed how reinsurance carriers look at free, like, massive freeze events. And so that changed a lot of things. And going forward, what we're seeing are carriers, if there's been freezing claims, not only are they requiring something that maybe detects a leak, they're requiring automatic water shutoff valves. Where if it detects more than a few ounces of leakage coming not from a sprinkler line, because you can't ever stop sprinkler lines, but from like a main line coming into the building, they'll automatically shut off the water. Those are some of the most costly, horrible claims to deal with. And again, act like you didn't have insurance.
Right.
How many of you volunteers want to come in at 5 a.m. on a Sunday morning and rip up wet carpet that's been soaked in 50,000 gallons of water? Because that's what's going to happen. You're not just going to wait for Service Master to do it. They're going to call in everybody. You're going to bring in, a utility knife. You're going to start cutting carpet. And then you're going to get outside and it's 10 below outside and you're carrying wet carpet and putting it in a roll off. Nobody wants to do that. If you didn't have insurance, you would do everything you could to make sure you didn't have to do that. And so now it's kind of that same piece. I would say the biggest predictor right now that we're looking at are going to be things like pipes bursting, or like, why have we had 5 slip and falls in the last 5 years? Like that's another problem. Shovel your sidewalk if that's happening.
Yes, that is really good. And I would say, even in my short history of being aware of claims out there, the might be nice to have a water shutoff valve. It's an absolute necessity now to have a water shutoff valve, is a big evolution in insurability. And if you could, I mean, I can just say this, or you can respond to it if you've got thoughts, but churches are uniquely vulnerable when it comes to water shutoff valves because many of them don't have occupants several days in a row during a week. You've got your big day on Sunday. Some of these ministries don't have many people in the halls most days of the week. And so if you have a water leakage, it could be a really, really unfortunate amount of time and an amount of water that comes out before you're aware of it. So having a water shutoff valve has moved way up the list of insurability metrics to say you can do something about this, and you should.
Yeah, and they're massive buildings, and they're humid, and you've got toilets that can run, you've got all kinds of things like that can happen. I mean, we insure many, many, 100,000 plus square foot buildings and that's why when pipes burst, the claims are gigantic. And they're huge, huge problems. And so the automatic water shutoff valve, here's what I'll say: it's $3,500 to put in like one valve. Sometimes churches have a few different lines coming in, and so maybe a large church might spend $15,000. But say this is a building valued at $25 million, and you put that in, and it prevents one potential claim over the next 5 years, which we have installed valves and know for a fact that it's prevented claims. It's gonna prevent a claim at some point for you. Small price to pay for the other opportunity of having to call or send a mass text out saying we need everybody to come in and help us haul wet carpet in 10-degree weather.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one last thing on claims history. Is there anything that can be done to improve claims history? How do you come alongside ministries and help them evaluate the claims they've experienced and how that impacts their insurability?
Yeah, time is the number one thing. Like, you want to maintain distance. The further you get from that claim without another claim happening, is great. But the only other thing you can do is just right when that claim happens, reach out to your agent and just let them know, hey, we've decided to make these changes, because we can't take away, what's done is done. We can't take it away. And so now we just need to do everything we can going forward to make sure that that doesn't happen again, or even take steps. Like, if it happens, it's not the end of the world, but take steps to make sure it doesn't happen.
Very good. Okay, so you mentioned working with an agent to make sure of things like this. That's really what you do. You work with ministries to make sure that their unique needs are met and covered and understood. So what are some of those like tailored pieces of how you work with a ministry to make an insurance policy suit them? Because you've mentioned before, generalist insurers versus ministry specialist insurers. What does ministry specialist insurance even mean?
It's very hard in our position to actually have to tell people what they don't want to hear. In the old school insurance market that we were in, maybe in the 2010s, early 20 teens, it was pretty easy to get an account to maybe switch over to you. Like, if you could save them a little bit of money and they liked you and you knew someone who knew them, and if all things came together, it was pretty easy to do. Now a lot of the conversations, I mean, we have a lot of agents going out, and actually churches might even consider paying more to go with us because they feel a sense of comfort in having Rich, who's on the other side of this wall, who's just phenomenal. He's been in the industry a long time as a claims adjuster as well. He can go out and he can tell a church maybe what they don't want to hear, but there's a level of comfort. Like, if my accountant always told me what I wanted to hear, but I was potentially going to get audited for it at some point, I wouldn't want that. And so we're going out and we're telling them, hey, these things are going to be a problem. And so the first thing I would say when you're looking for, a potential partner, is look for someone who's going to, obviously we want to pump a lot of positivity in the relationship, but we want to also tell it like it is. And understanding the narrative of the insurance industry and the reinsurance industry and how that all plays, and then the spectrum of disasters that's happened and the need for higher deductibles. Instead of apologizing for deductibles, we need to be really good at actually telling people why, if deductibles stayed at $1,000, this industry's not gonna make it. And so those are the things, number one, that you need to have in your program, is a good understanding of the macro insurance marketplace. And then we drill down into, the ministry specific things. And on the property side, you might have a company that could do a lot with just covering your building, covering your personal property if it burns down, or if there's a hailstorm. But then you have things like ministry continuation coverage, which would be, the extra expenses that you might incur as a result of downtime. Again, let's just talk about a fire. We had a fire last year. I think it's taken 14 to 16 months, not to rebuild the building, but to just rehab the sanctuary. That church has to find another place to meet, or they have to retrofit another area of their building. So they're going to incur all these extra costs to do that. Look for something that's going to reimburse you for that. Also, I know this podcast isn't exactly about it. I know we've covered it. I'm going to hop on what Kevin Norton had said in the past about the cyber exposure. Look for someone who's going to cover first party cyber, which would be like a coercive or fraudulent email, coercing you to, send money to a fraudulent party, things like that. And so the building and the personal property could be covered by maybe a non-church company, but you're getting into the territory of ministry continuation, first party cyber, if you're with a church specialist. Then the other piece is going to be, you need to have an agent who's going to ask a lot of questions. I don't let our people say, hey, just give me your declarations pages and, we'll put together something comparative. We don't mind seeing the declarations because then we have something to compare to, but that's what our recommendations are. We want to compare our recommendations to your current policy. So we're really trying to ask, what are the related organizations? What are you passionate about? What are you passionate about maybe doesn't even speak to any one type of ministry, but it just says, like, what's your overall goal in what you're trying to do? And if we understand what that goal is, we're going to be much better at putting something together that is going to match the needs of those goals. But I would say the biggest thing is going to be things like, do you have a foundation? Do you have a daycare? Do you have a food pantry? How active in the community are you? Do you do overseas missions? Tell us about your children's ministry. And how many people, how many volunteers, how do you train your volunteers? We haven't really asked anything about, do you have 1 million or 2 million in general liability coverage? And those are insurance questions. We're asking like behavioral questions that we can come in and tailor, the exposure, or we can tailor the solutions based on the unique exposures that you have, because every single one of the churches we work with is a little bit different. A lot of the policies look mostly the same, but there's always nuance that addresses specific to the ministry.
Yeah. Well, I like that. And it's something that if a ministry leader is listening to this podcast today, are you even confident of how you would write down what matters most to us? Not just, our mission statement or vision statement, but how are we actually putting our hands and feet to the things we say we care about the most? And the really unique thing about insurance is there's an insurance risk waiting in the wings of all that stuff, always. And so you may not be aware of it, but there's always an insurance risk behind every passion area, behind every outreach program, behind everything that you're doing as a ministry. So having a partner who knows how to ask that question is huge. And so I really like that as a starting point. Really, I think this all comes down to defining stewardship, not based on the amount of money saved, but based on, are we investing the money that we're investing in our insurance policy in ways that actually meet the needs that we have? That's good stewardship. So a ministry could come to the table and look at different insurance policies and not evaluate it just based on cost, but by saying, are we doing everything we need to take care of the things we do as a ministry, not the church down the street or any other commercial business, but the things that we do. So I like all of that. Now, you had mentioned something earlier that kind of piqued my interest about financial management as something that pertains to insurability. I'm interested in that. What does that mean?
it's almost like something that we overlook a little bit because it's just so foundational. Nobody is going to want to work with a ministry that, number one, I mean, I probably should have mentioned this. If there's any sort of history in this current market of not paying your bills, like from like paying your insurance premiums, that used to not be a big deal. You could reinstate policies. I've seen more than ever now where, and just so people know, companies do keep track of that. And so it'll be like, you know what? This ministry's had 8 non-pay, cancellation for non-pay plus reinstates in the last 2 years, and we've just decided we're not reinstating anymore, or the only way we're gonna reinstate is if they go on automatic bill pay. And the reason for that is that the insurance company at some point is taking a risk by continually reinstating that policy because of the potential gray area of the church almost it the church is being taught that their habit of not paying is actually fine, and I cannot pay my bill, and then they've established this precedent. It's happened 8 times in the last 2 years, and then on the ninth time, there's a claim that happens, and they're like, "You reinstate it every other time. I assumed you were gonna do it this time too because we established that precedent." And then all of a sudden, the insurance company is being reported to the Department of Insurance. And so you're seeing now cases where just something very simple, like just paying your premiums, again, it almost should be something we don't even need to talk about, but it is something that's become much more important. The other piece is that deductibles will never go back to what they were. What was $1,000 deductible, like even here in Nebraska now, it's hard to even imagine that we just 3 years ago were in a position where most policyholders had $1,000 deductibles, whereas now the whole industry's gone to percentage deductibles. 1, 2, 3% of the total building value is what the deductible is now. If you're in a $10 million building, a 1% deductible will be $100,000, right? Yes. And so you have to have reserves saved up. The other reason you have to have reserves saved up is really to try to avoid, maybe there's a toilet that was on throughout the weekend and it caused $4,000 worth of damage. Strongly would recommend that you just pay for that rather than having a claim on your record, a predictive claim. Go ahead and just take care of it without turning the claim in. Again, I know insurance is there for things like that, and it can be, but we really want to be there and have an established relationship when the large claim happens. And so, reserves for deductibles, reserves for small losses, and then just ensuring that you can, stay up on your premiums. Most insurance companies aren't going to ask to see bank statements to prove that you can pay your premiums, but certainly as a lagging indicator, looking at things like, hey, they didn't pay their bills, they weren't able to cover this deductible. As they're looking at the next renewal, the company might decide it's just not the right risk. And so it plays pretty heavily actually now.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And so this probably is in your previous answer, but are there things that ministries can do to improve the terms of their insurance policy because of their financial practices? When you're talking about having a reserve on hand, you can absorb a higher deductible if you know
Yes,
you're going to have a reserve on hand, and that lowers your premium. So
it does.
like things like that that's an empowering message related to deductibles. It's not, well, you're going to take on greater risk here. It's actually, you're saying this is putting you in the driver's seat of your policy in a way that you weren't before.
Like I said, the higher deductibles are not going away, and it is one of the few ways right now that you can look for ways to actually reduce your premium in a time where, premiums, I fully acknowledge it, even on my home and auto, like sometimes I look and I just can't believe it. So by the way, there's no secret that any of us in the industry have. We're all in the same situation everybody else is, where we're kind of blown away by how much insurance costs. I just happen to be on the other side where I see also how much claims cost, and so I know it's justified. But that being said, it is one of the few ways that you can reduce those costs and take on a lot of that exposure yourself. And again, take ownership of your insurance program, acting like you don't have insurance, all that stuff, which is going to be very powerful. And I have seen a massive paradigm shift in 2 years. We were so worried to have these conversations. And what we found out is actually every board and every administrator, they understand. We were so timid when deductibles changed, but then when you said things like, "You know what? That roof that might have cost 200,000 a couple of years ago now costs 700,000." I'd be like, "Yeah, I know. Like, I just put a fence in my backyard and it cost me $1 billion." Like, everything's expensive
Right.
now. It's just so expensive, and so people get it, and so we have those conversations, and I've seen massive paradigm change as far as churches that would have turned in every little claim are now highly protective of their insurance program, which shows me that the attitude toward this is changing in a very positive way, which is about the only thing that's going to get the industry as a whole kind of tipped right side up again is collective ownership of your insurance program.
That's awesome. Okay, so we're coming down to the end here, and I want to honor your time and everything, but really, is there anything that I've missed that you thought we'd be talking about today? I don't want to leave anything on the table here.
What was just a given is just no longer a given anymore. The most beautiful, well kept property that 5 years ago would have had five different brokers coming to talk to it just might not receive the same attention from underwriters. The other piece is we tend to villainize maybe the insurance company side of things once in a while, but I always tell my staff too, like when one of my agents is like, we want to write this piece of business, I'm thinking, okay, the underwriter at some point is going to have to go to their manager and say, I know they only had, they had 3 water claims, but I just have a really good feeling about this one. If that water claim happens again the next year, the underwriter who made that decision, their boss is going to be like, what were you thinking? They have to be accountable as well. And so just understand that, I mean, especially from Brotherhood Mutual standpoint, they want to ensure every possible ministry, but they have to find ways to do it sustainably. And so you've got to give them a reason to make those decisions. And what we found is Brotherhood Mutual's underwriters who are passionate about ministry, by the way, this whole company exists and they go to work every single day. They show up in that building and their only job is to care for the ministries that they work with. They want to do everything that they can to take care of as many ministries as they can. The number one thing they need to have is justification because, hey, Pastor Bill's a nice guy, just no longer works. That maybe even did work a few years ago. It just doesn't work anymore. There's got to be something more than just a gut feeling or they're a nice person. It's got to be something that's very tangible that gets them the opportunity to say, hey, because they did these things and they had some losses, we can still take the risk and take on that exposure because we like what their attitude management is and their ownership of their insurance program.
Very good. I'm going to ask you one more question, and it actually is a callback to the very first answer you gave, which is about you and your work within the insurance industry and feeling like you have found what you were made to do when it comes to protecting ministries. What do you mean by that? What matters to you so much about doing the work you're doing now to protect and, make sure that ministries are thriving versus any other job you could do? I'm just interested.
I will say this. I know that I didn't dream about doing this job when I was a kid. Okay. I think I thought I was going to play in the NBA.
Same.
And so which obviously didn't happen. And coming out of college, I think I looked at the insurance industry as an opportunity to like own my own business. I think I was a computer programming major to start in college. I had no idea what I was going to do. But I just remember the first time that I went to Brotherhood Mutual, which at that point we insured home and auto and all kinds of other things. And I went to Brotherhood Mutual and I saw the collective passion for ministry. And I actually, this is going to sound weird, but for the first time didn't feel kind of embarrassed to be in the industry that I was in. The easiest way to shut a conversation down in a party is to tell them that you do insurance. Okay. Like, because they're like, oh, so you're going to ask me if you can quote my life insurance or my home and auto. Now, when I tell people that we protect 35% of all the ministries within the territory that we do, they're like, what does that even mean? Like, what kind of risks do churches have? And I'm really proud to do what we do. Like, the churches that we serve are doing incredible work. They need help. And our agency and the agencies that work with Brotherhood Mutual have unlocked that it's not just about an insurance policy. It's about the way that we resource the ministries to help them be proactive and help them be safer. It helps them sleep better at night, knowing that, hey, we've taken steps on HR or security or abuse prevention to do the little things that are going to make our ministries safer. We're being better stewards of our people as well, which they're, shepherding and protecting. I'll just tell you, having a partner like Brotherhood Mutual, people who are sold out to do it, and then my staff that's just absolutely incredible. I can't imagine doing anything other than what I do now. And it's a privilege to do it. And I don't even really get to write insurance much anymore because I'm busy trying to be a leader, but it's an incredible thing. And I mean that. I wish I could do a whole podcast about that. But
And we should. So with that in mind, that's such a good answer. I'm really thankful to hear all of that. And I believe that. I have seen that from you now over years. And it's a privilege to know that you are doing that, and you're now leading an organization where you're influencing others to do the same. And so Lightwell of Colorado, serving the states of Nebraska, Kansas, Colorado, Wyoming, and both Dakotas. John Korsmo, president of that organization. It has been a sincere pleasure to have you on the Lightwell podcast today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
My thanks once again to John Korsmo. What a great conversation. Absolutely love his heart for taking care of ministries. I hope you felt that. I hope you felt like there are people out there thinking about the things that matter most to you. Thank you as a ministry leader or whoever you are for taking time to listen to this conversation today. And if anything about this sparked a question, something that you need help with, you can start by going to lightwell.com, looking for any resources or ways to connect with us there. And until the next episode of the podcast, let's go and let it shine.